Welcome, restless wanderers of the night. This is Sleepless Survivors, your companion through the quiet hours when the world sleeps but you cannot. Tonight, we journey together into the ancient past, to a time before recorded history, to stories carved in clay when writing itself was new. Let the weight of these ancient tales carry you gently into rest as we explore the mysteries of the Anunnaki. Close your eyes if you wish. Let your breathing slow. There is no urgency here. No need to remember every detail. Simply drift along this river of ancient knowledge and let it carry you where you need to go. The night is long, and we have time. Time to explore the oldest stories humanity ever wrote down. Time to wonder about the gods who came before. Time to rest. Let us begin. Part 1. The Dawn of Memory. In the beginning, there was Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers. The Tigris and Euphrates flowed through desert and plain, bringing life to an otherwise barren landscape. It was here, in what is now Iraq, that human civilization first bloomed, and it was here that the stories began. The Sumerians settled in this fertile crescent nearly 6,000 years ago. They built the first cities, they invented writing, and they told stories of beings they called the Anunnaki, gods who walked among them, gods who shaped their world. Imagine for a moment the heat of the Mesopotamian sun, the clay beneath your feet, the sound of the rivers flowing, constant and eternal. In this place scribes sat cross-legged, pressing reed styluses into soft clay tablets, recording the will of the gods and the deeds of kings. These weren't just religious texts, they were histories, at least in the minds of those who wrote them. The Anunnaki weren't distant, abstract deities dwelling in philosophical realms. They were present, active. They had personalities, conflicts, desires. They interfered in human affairs and shaped the course of civilization. The word Anunnaki itself means something like those who came from heaven to earth, or princely offspring. The etymology suggests beings of high status descended from the sky. In the Sumerian language, An meant heaven or sky, and the Anunnaki were in some sense children of the sky. But who were they really? What did the ancient Mesopotamians believe about these beings? The pantheon was vast and complex. At its head sat Anu, the Sky Father, king of the gods. Below him were his children and their descendants. Enlil, god of wind and storm. Enki, god of water and wisdom. Ninhursag, the mother goddess. Inanna, goddess of love and war. And so many others. Hundreds of deities arranged in hierarchies, each with their own domains, their own cities, their own temples. The Anunnaki weren't a separate group from these gods. Rather, the term seems to have referred to the great gods collectively, particularly in their role as judges and decision-makers. In some texts, they're the assembly of the gods, meeting to determine the fate of the world. In others, they're specifically the chthonic deities, the gods of the underworld, sitting in judgment of the dead. But let's go back further, back to the very beginning of their stories, back to creation itself. Rest now, as we drift back through time. Let your muscles relax. Let the tension drain from your shoulders, your neck, your jaw. We're travelling to the dawn of all things, and there's no hurry. The ancients believed time was cyclical, not linear. We can take as long as we need. Part 2. The Creation of the World. The Babylonian creation epic, the Enuma Elish, begins with primordial waters. In the beginning there was Apsu, the freshwater deep, and Tiamat, the saltwater sea. These two cosmic beings mingled their waters together, and from their union the first gods were born. Can you picture it? The dark, undifferentiated waters, neither hot nor cold, neither light nor dark, everything in potential, nothing yet formed. And then, slowly, consciousness emerges from the deep, the first gods. But these gods were restless and noisy. They disturbed Apsu's peace. He could not sleep for their clamour, their activity, their being, and so Apsu decided to destroy them, to return to the silence of the void. The gods learned of this plan. One among them, Ea, who is the same as the Sumerian Enki, god of wisdom and magic, devised a spell. He cast Apsu into a deep sleep, a sleep so profound it was indistinguishable from death. Then Ea killed Apsu and established his dwelling place upon the body of the fallen primordial father. Let that image settle in your mind, the god of wisdom, making his home upon the corpse of chaos. building order from disorder, creating a place of peace from violence. Ea had a son, Marduk, young, strong, brilliant in appearance. As the epic describes him, he was perfect in his limbs, his understanding was sophisticated beyond measure. When Tiamat, enraged at the murder of her consort, raised an army of monsters to avenge Apsu, it was Marduk who volunteered to face her. But Marduk asked a price for his service. He demanded to be made king of all the gods, to be granted supreme authority. The assembly of the gods, desperate, agreed to his terms. The battle between Marduk and Tiamat is one of the great cosmic struggles in ancient mythology. She came at him with her monsters, with the 11 creatures she had birthed to serve as her army. Venom instead of blood ran through their veins. She placed the Tablet of Destinies, which granted authority over the universe, upon the chest of her new consort Chingu. Marduk faced them with his weapons, the winds, the storm, the lightning. When Tiamat opened her mouth to swallow him, he drove the wind into her, filling her belly until she could not close her jaws. Then he shot an arrow into her mouth, piercing her heart, killing the primordial mother. Breathe slowly now, in and out. The battle is over. The storm has passed. After his victory, Marduk split Tiamat's body in two like a shellfish. From one half he created the sky, from the other the earth. Her eyes became the sources of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Her tears became the springs that fed them. Her tail became the Milky Way. From chaos, Marduk created order. From a single body he created the world. And then came the question, who would serve the gods? Who would maintain the temples, provide the offerings, do the work of civilization? Marduk had a solution. He would create humankind. Part 3. The creation of humanity. The creation of humanity is described in several Mesopotamian texts, and the details vary, but the core idea remains consistent. Humans were created to serve the gods, to relieve them of labour. In one version from the Atrahasis epic, we learn that originally, the minor gods, the Igigi, did all the work. They dug the rivers, they maintained the irrigation canals, they built the temples, they laboured for centuries and they grew tired, exhausted, angry. Finally they rebelled. They burned their tools and surrounded the house of Enlil, the chief god, demanding an end to their suffering. The great gods convened a council. What could be done? They needed workers, but the Igigi refused to work any longer. Enki, ever the problem solver, proposed a solution. Create a new being, a worker to replace the Igigi. Create humanity. The goddess Belet Ili, the womb goddess, was called upon to perform the task. But humans couldn't be made from nothing. They needed substance. They needed divine essence. And so the gods decided to sacrifice one of their own. They killed Waela, one of the gods who had participated in the rebellion. From his blood and flesh mixed with clay, Belet Ili created the first humans, 7 males and 7 females. Imagine that. Humanity born from the body of a rebellious god, made from clay and divine blood. We carry within us, according to this story, the substance of divinity itself, mixed with the earth. But we carry too the spirit of rebellion. The god Waela rebelled against the established order, and from his body we were made. The Mesopotamians believed this explained the human condition. We have divine intelligence, divine consciousness, but we are bound to labour, to mortality, to suffering. In the Enuma Elish, it's slightly different. After Marduk defeats Tiamat, he takes Chingu, her consort who had worn the Tablet of Destinies, and kills him. From Chingu's blood, Ea creates humanity. Again, the pattern. Humans are made from the blood of a divine being, specifically one who challenged the cosmic order. And again, humanity is created explicitly to serve the gods, to maintain their temples, to provide them with offerings. The gods, freed from labour, could rest. And humanity began its long work. Let your breathing deepen now. Feel the weight of your body against the surface beneath you. You too can rest. The work of the day is done. The ancient stories flow around you like water. Part 4. The cities and their gods, the Sumerians built cities, the first true cities in human history. And each city was the dwelling place of a god. Each god had their temple, their cult, their priesthood. The city was organised around the temple, and the temple was the house of the god. In Eridu, the oldest city, stood the temple of Enki, god of the underground waters, of wisdom, of magic. Enki was the friend of humanity, the god who gave us the gifts of civilization. He taught us writing, mathematics, brewing, agriculture. He was the keeper of the me, the divine laws or powers that governed reality itself. Enki appears in myths as a trickster, a clever god who often works around the wishes of other, more powerful deities to help humanity. When the Great Flood came, for instance, it was Enki who warned humanity, who helped one man build a boat to survive. In Nippur stood the temple of Enlil, the powerful god of wind and storm, the king of the earth. Enlil was stern, mighty, the enforcer of divine will. Where Enki was clever and compassionate, Enlil was authoritarian and demanding. The Mesopotamians both revered and feared him. In Uruk, the great city, stood the temple of Inanna, goddess of love, of war, of the planet Venus. Inanna was complex, multifaceted, powerful. She descended to the underworld and returned. She fell in love with heroes and caused the deaths of kings. She was desire itself, beautiful and terrible. Each city had its patron deity, and the cities competed for prestige and power through the glory of their gods. When one city conquered another, it was understood as the victory of one god over another. The political and the religious were inseparable. Picture, if you can, the ziggurat rising from the city centre. A massive stepped pyramid of mud brick climbing toward the sky. At its peak, a temple, the dwelling place of the god. The priest-king would climb the stairs to commune with the deity, to receive instructions, to perform rituals. The ziggurat was a bridge between earth and heaven, between the human and divine realms. It was a mountain built by human hands, an imitation of the cosmic mountain where the gods dwelled. At night, under the stars, the ziggurat would loom over the city, a dark mass against the sky. Torches would burn at its peak, and the people would know that their god was present, watching over them, dwelling among them. The Anunnaki, the great gods, were not distant. They were here, in the temples, receiving offerings, issuing commands through their priests, shaping the destiny of the cities and the people. Let that image fill your mind. The ancient city at night, the ziggurat against the stars, the river flowing nearby, constant and eternal, the world at peace under the watch of the gods. Your breath is slow and steady now, deep and calm. The ancient world is far away, yet it surrounds you. Time is circular, the past and present touch. Part 5. The Tablet of Destinies. Among the most powerful objects in Mesopotamian mythology was the Tablet of Destinies, sometimes called the Tablets of Destiny. This artifact granted supreme authority over the universe. Whoever possessed it controlled the fates of gods and humans alike. Originally, the tablet belonged to Enlil as king of the earth. But in one famous myth, it was stolen by Anzu, a massive bird-like creature, sometimes depicted with a lion's head. Anzu served as the doorkeeper in Enlil's temple, and one day, while Enlil was bathing, Anzu seized the tablet and flew away to the mountains. With the tablet in Anzu's possession, the cosmic order broke down. The gods lost their authority. Destinies could no longer be determined. The universe teetered on the edge of chaos. The gods needed a champion to retrieve the tablet. Several were asked and refused, knowing how dangerous the task would be. Finally, Ninurta, god of war and hunting, agreed to face Anzu. The battle was long and terrible. Anzu had the power of the tablet, and every arrow Ninurta fired, every weapon he hurled, fell harmlessly away before they could strike. The fate of each arrow was written on the tablet, and Anzu could simply decree that they would miss. But Ninurta, with the advice of Ea, found a way. He fired a massive volley of arrows, creating a windstorm of projectiles that obscured the sky. In the confusion, one arrow struck Anzu, cutting the feathers of his wings. The bird monster fell from the sky, and Ninurta recovered the tablet. Order was restored. Ninurta was honoured as a great hero, and the Tablet of Destinies returned to its rightful place. This story reveals something important about Mesopotamian cosmic thought. Authority was not inherent. It was granted by possession of the right objects, the right knowledge, the right position. The Tablet of Destinies was the physical representation of cosmic authority. Without it, even the king of the gods was powerless. The me, which Enki guarded, were similar. They were not abstract principles, but actual objects or powers that could be stolen, given as gifts or lost. When Inanna famously tricked Enki into giving her the me after getting him drunk, she literally carried them away in her boat. Enki, sobering up, sent monsters to retrieve them, but Inanna made it back to her city of Uruk with the me intact. These objects were the keys to reality itself, and the gods competed for them, fought over them, used them to establish their power. Breathe deeply. Feel the solidity of the world around you. In the ancient view, that solidity was maintained by divine objects and divine will. The tablet wrote the fate of each moment. The me determined what was possible, and the gods held it all together. You are safe in this moment. The order holds. Rest. Part 6. Gilgamesh and the Anunnaki. No discussion of ancient Mesopotamia would be complete without the Epic of Gilgamesh, perhaps the oldest surviving work of great literature. Gilgamesh was a historical king of Uruk who ruled around 2700 BCE, but in the epic named for him, he becomes something more, a hero, a seeker of immortality, a man who confronted the gods themselves. Gilgamesh was 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, born of a goddess mother and a human father. He was mighty, beautiful, terrible in his power, but he was also a tyrant, exhausting his people with constant building projects, demanding the right to sleep with every bride on her wedding night. The people of Uruk cried out to the gods for relief, and the gods, hearing their prayers, created a counterpart for Gilgamesh, Enkidu, a wild man who lived with the animals, who knew nothing of civilization. Enkidu was brought to Uruk through the efforts of a temple prostitute, who civilized him through intimacy and companionship. When Enkidu and Gilgamesh met, they fought a tremendous battle, but neither could defeat the other. They became friends, brothers, the closest of companions. Together they embarked on adventures. They travelled to the cedar forest to fight Humbaba, the guardian monster placed there by Enlil. Despite warnings from the gods, they killed Humbaba and cut down the sacred cedars. When they returned to Uruk, the goddess Inanna desired Gilgamesh and propositioned him. But Gilgamesh, knowing the fates of Inanna's previous lovers, rejected her. Enraged, Inanna convinced her father Anu to send the Bull of Heaven to destroy Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh and Enkidu killed the Bull of Heaven. They had now offended the gods twice, killing 2 creatures under divine protection. The Anunnaki assembled to determine the consequences. Someone must die for these offences. The assembly decreed that Enkidu would be the one to pay the price. Enkidu fell ill. He lay dying for 12 days, cursing his fate, lamenting that he would die in bed like a coward rather than in glorious battle. Gilgamesh sat by his side, unable to help, watching his beloved friend fade away. When Enkidu died, Gilgamesh was devastated. For the first time, he truly understood mortality. He had lost his companion, but more than that, he had seen his own future. He too would die. This realization broke something in Gilgamesh. Despite being 2/3 divine, he was mortal, and he could not accept it. Let the sorrow of that realization wash through you and then fade. Loss is part of the human story. The ancient poets knew this. They wove it into their greatest tales. Even heroes must face death. But Gilgamesh was not ready to accept his fate. He set out on a quest to find immortality. Part 7. The Quest for Immortality. Gilgamesh knew of one human who had escaped death, Utnapishtim, the survivor of the Great Flood, whom the gods had granted eternal life. If Gilgamesh could reach Utnapishtim, perhaps he could learn the secret of immortality. The journey was long and perilous. Gilgamesh crossed the wilderness, fighting off lions, travelling through the mountain passes where scorpion beings guarded the way to the sun's path. He passed through 12 leagues of darkness, a tunnel through the mountains, where no light penetrated. When he emerged, he found himself in the garden of the gods, where trees bore jewels as fruit. He met Siduri, a divine barmaid who tended a tavern at the edge of the world. She counselled him to abandon his quest, to accept mortality, to return home and enjoy the simple pleasures of life: good food, fine clothes, the love of family. But Gilgamesh would not be dissuaded. Siduri directed him to Ushanabi, the ferryman who could carry him across the waters of death to reach Utnapishtim's dwelling. Finally, after many trials, Gilgamesh reached the farther shore and met Utnapishtim. He demanded to know, "How did you escape death? What must I do to live forever?" Utnapishtim's answer was not what Gilgamesh wanted to hear. He had not earned immortality through any feat of strength or courage. Rather, he had been in the right place at the right time, and the gods had taken pity on him. Utnapishtim then told Gilgamesh the story of the Great Flood. Rest now as we listen to this ancient tale, one of the oldest flood stories in human literature, predating the biblical account by more than 1,000 years. Part 8. The Great Flood. Long ago, Utnapishtim began. The world was young, and the human race was already numerous. The people were loud, busy, constantly active. Their noise disturbed the gods, particularly Enlil, who could not rest for the clamour of humanity. Enlil decided to wipe out the human race entirely, to return the world to silence. He convinced the other gods to send a great flood that would drown every living thing on earth. But Enki, who had created humanity and loved his creations, could not let this happen. He was bound by an oath not to reveal the god's plan to any human, but Enki was clever. Instead of speaking directly to Utnapishtim, he spoke to the wall of Utnapishtim's reed house, knowing the man was on the other side listening. Reed house, Enki said to the wall, hear my words. Tear down your house and build a boat. Abandon your possessions and save your life. Bring aboard the seed of all living things. Utnapishtim heard and understood. He tore down his house and used the materials to build a great boat, a cube-shaped vessel with 6 decks. He loaded it with silver and gold, with all his family, with craftsmen and workers, with the seed of every living thing, with animals wild and domestic. Then the flood came. The storm was terrible beyond description. The gods themselves were frightened by its power. Even Ishtar, who had argued for the destruction of humanity, cried out in regret, lamenting that she had agreed to such devastation. The flood lasted 6 days and 7 nights. The water rose over the mountains. Every living thing drowned. The world returned to the primordial ocean, undifferentiated and lifeless. On the 7th day the storm ceased. The boat came to rest on a mountain. Utnapishtim opened a window and looked out. Everywhere, silence. Everywhere, water. The face of the earth was flat as a roof. Utnapishtim released a dove. It flew away but found no place to land and returned. He released a swallow. It too found nowhere to rest and came back. Finally he released a raven. The raven flew away and did not return, having found dry land at last. Utnapishtim made an offering to the gods. He set up an altar on the mountain peak and burned incense. The gods, who had received no offerings during the flood, who had been starving for the scent of sacrifice, gathered around like flies. Ishtar arrived wearing her necklace of lapis lazuli and swore that she would remember these days forever, that she would never again agree to such destruction. Then Enlil arrived. Seeing that humans had survived, he was furious. How did any living thing escape? No human was supposed to survive. Enki stepped forward and defended his actions. It was not right to destroy the innocent with the guilty, he said. Punish the sinner for his sin, punish the transgressor for his transgression, but do not annihilate all of humanity. Send wild beasts or famine or plague if you must reduce their numbers, but do not send another flood. Enlil, faced with the fait accompli and Enki's wisdom, relented. He went aboard the boat and brought Utnapishtim and his wife out. He touched their foreheads and blessed them, granting them immortality. But he also exiled them to the ends of the earth, to dwell far from humanity forever. And that, Utnapishtim told Gilgamesh, is how I became immortal. The gods granted it to me as a unique gift, one that will never be repeated. There is no path for you to follow. Gilgamesh was devastated. He had come so far, suffered so much, and there was no answer, no solution, no escape from death. But Utnapishtim took pity on him. He offered Gilgamesh a challenge. If you would live forever, he said, first prove you can conquer sleep, which is death's little brother. Stay awake for 6 days and 7 nights. Gilgamesh agreed, but as soon as he sat down to begin his vigil, sleep overwhelmed him. He slept for 6 days and 7 nights, while Utnapishtim's wife baked a loaf of bread for each day to prove how long Gilgamesh had been unconscious. When Gilgamesh awoke, he saw the loaves of bread in various stages of mouldiness, and realized he had failed. If he could not even conquer sleep, how could he hope to conquer death? Despairing, Gilgamesh prepared to return home, but Utnapishtim's wife urged her husband to give Gilgamesh something for his journey, some consolation for coming so far. Utnapishtim revealed a secret. At the bottom of the cosmic ocean grew a plant. This plant would not grant immortality, but it would restore youth. An old man who ate it would become young again. Gilgamesh dove to the bottom of the ocean and retrieved the plant. He was overjoyed. Even if he could not live forever, he could renew his youth whenever age weakened him. It was not immortality, but it was something. He began his long journey home, carrying the plant with him. But one day, passing by a pool of cool water, Gilgamesh decided to bathe. He left the plant on the shore, and while he was in the water, a serpent emerged from the pool, smelled the plant's fragrance, and ate it. The serpent immediately sloughed off its old skin, revealing a new, younger skin beneath. It slithered away, renewed. Gilgamesh returned to shore and saw that the plant was gone. He sat down and wept. Everything he had struggled for was lost. He had failed to gain immortality. He had failed to even keep the gift of renewed youth. He had nothing. There was nothing left to do but return to Uruk, to his city, to his mortal life. The epic ends with Gilgamesh showing his companion Urshanabi the walls of Uruk. "Look," he says, "at these walls I built. See how strong they are, how well made. This is what remains when a man dies. His works, his city, his legacy." It's a melancholy ending to a melancholy tale. Gilgamesh does not achieve what he set out to find, but perhaps he finds something else. Acceptance. The understanding that mortality is the human condition, and that meaning must be found in life itself, not in escaping it. Let that truth settle gently over you. You too are mortal, and that is not a curse but simply what it means to be human. The ancient poets understood. They wrote it into their greatest story. Your breathing is slow and deep now. The tale of Gilgamesh drifts through your mind like a dream. Let it carry you deeper into rest. Part 9. The Descent of Inanna. Among the most haunting of Mesopotamian myths is the descent of Inanna, a story of death and rebirth, of power lost and regained, of the journey to the underworld and the return to life. Inanna, goddess of love and war, queen of heaven, decided to descend to the underworld to attend the funeral rites of the Bull of Heaven, husband of her sister Ereshkigal. Or perhaps she sought to extend her power even into the realm of the dead. The text is ambiguous about her motives. Before she departed, Inanna instructed her servant Ninshubur, "If I do not return in 3 days, seek help from the gods. Plead with them to rescue me." Inanna then descended. The underworld had 7 gates, and at each gate she was required to remove a piece of her divine regalia. Her crown at the first gate, her lapis lazuli necklace at the second, her jewels at the third, her breastplate at the fourth, her ring at the fifth, her measuring rod and line at the sixth, her royal robe at the 7th. She arrived before Ereshkigal naked and powerless, stripped of all divine authority. The 7 judges of the underworld, the Anunnaki of the dead, fixed their eyes of death upon her. Inanna died. Her corpse was hung on a hook on the wall. 3 days passed. Ninshubur began her lamentations, going from city to city, from temple to temple, seeking help. She went first to Enlil, who refused to help. Inanna sought the underworld, he said. She must abide by its laws. She went to Nanna, who also refused. Finally she came to Enki. Enki, the wise, the compassionate, agreed to help. He created 2 beings from the dirt beneath his fingernails, neither male nor female, creatures who could pass freely between the worlds. He gave them the food of life and the water of life and sent them to the underworld. These beings descended and found Ereshkigal in the throes of labour pains, suffering terribly. They sympathized with her pain, offering compassion. Moved by their kindness, Ereshkigal offered them any gift they wanted. They asked for the corpse hanging on the wall. Ereshkigal, bound by her promise, gave it to them. They sprinkled the corpse with the food of life and the water of life, and Inanna rose from the dead. But there was a law in the underworld. No one who descends can return unless they provide a substitute. Someone must take Inanna's place. Inanna ascended through the 7 gates, reclaiming her regalia at each one. She returned to the upper world, and demons of the underworld followed her, seeking her substitute. They came first to her loyal servant Ninshubur, dressed in rags, still mourning her mistress. "Take her," the demons suggested. But Inanna refused. Ninshubur had tried to save her. She would not be the substitute. They came to her sons, who were also in mourning. Again the demons suggested taking them, and again Inanna refused. They had honoured her properly. Finally, they came to her husband, Dumuzi. He was not mourning. Instead, he sat on a throne, dressed in fine clothes, enjoying the pleasures of kingship in Inanna's absence. Inanna looked at him with the eye of death. "Take him," she said. The demon seized Dumuzi. He fled, calling on the sun god Utu to help him escape. Utu transformed him into a snake and he slithered away. But the demons pursued him relentlessly. Eventually, through the intercession of Dumuzi's sister Geshtinana, a compromise was reached. Dumuzi would spend half the year in the underworld, and Geshtinana would spend the other half, alternating eternally. And so, the cycle was established. Death and rebirth. Descent and ascent. The turning of the seasons. This myth is rich with symbolism. Inanna's descent strips away her power, her identity, her very life. She must die to be reborn. And her return is not simple restoration. It requires sacrifice, substitution, the acknowledgement that life and death are bound together. Some scholars see in this story an ancient ritual cycle, perhaps related to seasonal changes. Others see a psychological journey, a confrontation with death and the shadow self. The Mesopotamians themselves likely saw it as cosmic reality. The gods themselves must face death, must descend to the underworld, must be renewed. Breathe in the darkness, breathe out the light. The cycle continues, eternal and unchanging. You are part of it. This endless dance of life and death, waking and sleeping. Let it carry you deeper into rest. Part 10. Enki and the Organization of the World. Enki, the god of wisdom, appears in countless myths as the organizer of civilization, the one who establishes order and grants humanity the gifts of culture. One long hymn describes how Enki travelled throughout the land, visiting each city and region, establishing its character and blessing it with prosperity. He began with the Euphrates River, filling it with water, stocking it with fish, causing reeds to grow along its banks. He appointed deities to oversee the river, to maintain its flow, to ensure its bounty. He travelled to the Tigris, doing the same, then to the marshlands, the mountains, the plains. Each landscape received his attention, his blessings, his organising intelligence. He established the cities. To Eridu, his own city, he granted preeminence in wisdom and sacred knowledge. To Ur, prosperity and kingship. To Uruk, the art of war and sacred prostitution. Each city received its particular character, its special gifts. He created the tools of civilization, the plough for agriculture, the pickaxe for building, the mould for brick-making. He appointed gods and goddesses to oversee each craft, each profession. He created the holy me, the divine laws and powers that govern reality. Kingship was a me. The crown was a me. Truth was a me. Descent to the underworld was a me. There were more than 100 me, covering every aspect of existence, from the sublime to the practical. Enki guarded these me in his city of Eridu, in his temple of the Abzu, the cosmic underground ocean of fresh water. They were his treasures, the keys to cosmic order. But in one famous myth, Inanna desired the me for her city of Uruk. She visited Enki, who welcomed her with a feast. They drank beer together, lots of beer. Enki, growing drunk and generous, began giving Inanna the me, one by one. "Take the crown," he said. "Take kingship. Take divine power. Take truth. Take descent to the underworld and ascent from it. Take the art of lovemaking. Take the art of music. Take wisdom. Take all of it." Inanna accepted each gift gratefully, then loaded them into her boat and fled back to Uruk. When Enki sobered up, he realized what he'd done and sent his vizier with monsters to retrieve the me. But Inanna, with the help of her servant Ninshubur, fought off each attack. She made it back to Uruk with the me intact. Enki, recognizing defeat, accepted the situation, and Uruk became a great city, blessed with the me, with the powers of civilization. This myth is playful, almost comic in tone. The wise god gets drunk and gives away cosmic power, then futilely tries to take it back. But beneath the humour is a deeper point. Power and culture can be transferred, shared, spread. Civilization is not static, but dynamic. And even the gods make mistakes. Enki is portrayed throughout Mesopotamian literature as fundamentally benevolent toward humanity. He creates us. He protects us. He gives us the gifts we need to thrive. When other gods would destroy humanity, Enki finds ways to save us. He is the go-to problem solver, the clever one who finds solutions when brute force fails. He is the god of magic, of incantations, of the secret knowledge that allows one to manipulate reality. Rest in that thought. In the ancient world, there were beings who cared for humanity, who worked on our behalf, who wanted us to succeed. The stories say so. Whether you believe in them literally or see them as metaphors, the sentiment remains. We are not alone. We are not without allies. Let your muscles relax completely. Let your mind drift. The ancient stories continue, endless and soothing, like the flow of the two rivers through Mesopotamia. Part 11. The Underworld and its Laws. The Mesopotamian underworld was called Irkala, a dark and dusty place where the dead dwelt as shadows of their former selves. It was ruled by Ereshkigal, Inanna's sister, and her consort Nergal, god of plague and war. The underworld was not a place of punishment for the wicked or reward for the righteous, at least not in the way later religions would conceive of the afterlife. Rather, it was simply where everyone went when they died. Rich and poor, good and evil, all descended to the same dark realm. There, they dwelt in dust and darkness. They ate clay and drank muddy water. They were ruled by the Anunnaki in their aspect as judges of the dead, who determined each soul's fate. The entrance to the underworld lay in the east, where the sun sets, descending daily into the realm of death before being reborn each dawn. To reach the underworld, one had to cross 7 gates, at each of which one was stripped of the living world's attributes. The Mesopotamians deeply feared the underworld. They performed elaborate burial rites to ensure their dead would find rest there. They left offerings at graves, poured libations of water, left food for the spirits of the deceased. They told stories of the horrors of the underworld, of the demons who dwelt there, of the suffering of the dead. In one text, a prince named Kumbaya is shown a vision of the underworld, where he sees the suffering of those who did not receive proper burial, who were not mourned, who were forgotten. But there were also stories of those who journeyed to the underworld and returned. Inanna's descent, which we've already discussed, was the most famous. Ishtar, the Akkadian equivalent of Inanna, made a similar journey. In another myth, Nergal himself journeyed to the underworld. The story begins with the gods holding a banquet. Ereshkigal, queen of the underworld, could not attend, so she sent a messenger. All the gods rose to show respect when the messenger arrived, all except Nergal. This was a grave insult. Ereshkigal demanded that Nergal be sent to the underworld to pay for his disrespect. Nergal, a fierce warrior god, descended with a host of demons at his command. He broke through the 7 gates, defeated the guardians, and seized Ereshkigal by her hair, dragging her from her throne. He was about to kill her, when she cried out, "Do not kill me, be my husband, and we will rule the underworld together." Nergal agreed, and so the underworld gained a king to match its queen, a god of death and violence to share power with the goddess of the dead. The Mesopotamians believed the dead could, under certain circumstances, return to haunt the living. Those who died violently, who were not properly buried, who had no descendants to make offerings to them, these could become vengeful spirits. There were rituals to appease such spirits, to drive them away, to protect the living from their malice. Priests performed exorcisms, amulets were worn for protection. Magic circles were drawn to keep out evil. The boundary between life and death was permeable but dangerous. One did not cross it lightly. And those who did cross, whether as living visitors to the underworld or as dead spirits returning to the world, brought with them the touch of that dark realm. Picture the darkness of the underworld. Not the darkness of a night with stars, but a deeper darkness, underground, heavy with the weight of earth above. The dead shuffle through this darkness, barely conscious, barely themselves. They are memories, echoes, shadows. And yet, the Mesopotamians believed they could still hunger, still thirst, still need. So the living made offerings, poured water, spoke the names of the dead so they would not be forgotten. Your own breathing is so slow now, so deep. You're drifting into a state between waking and sleeping, between consciousness and dreams. Like the ancient underworld, this is a threshold place. You're safe here. Rest here. Let the darkness hold you gently. Part 12. The Demons and Monsters. The Mesopotamian cosmos was populated not only with gods, but with a vast array of demons, monsters and spirits. Some were malevolent, causing disease and misfortune. Others were protective, guarding against evil. Many inhabited the liminal spaces between civilization and chaos, between order and disorder. There were the Udug, demons who lurked in desert places, in ruins, in anywhere humans had abandoned. There were the Alua, who caused sleep paralysis, sitting on the chests of sleepers, suffocating them. There were the Lilitu, female demons of the night, who seduced men and drank their blood. The most famous of these was Lilitu herself, who in later Jewish tradition became Lilith, Adam's first wife. There was Lamashtu, a terrible goddess who brought disease to children, who stole babies from their mothers' breasts. Pregnant women wore amulets to protect against her, and new mothers performed rituals to keep her away from their infants. There was Pazuzu, the demon of the southwest wind, who brought fever and plague. But Pazuzu was also invoked for protection, particularly against Lamashtu. His grotesque image, with lion's body, eagle's talons, and a hideous face, was carved into amulets and placed in doorways to frighten away evil spirits. The ancient Mesopotamians lived in a world full of unseen forces. Disease was caused by demons. Misfortune was the result of witchcraft or divine anger. Dreams were messages from gods or invasions by spirits. To protect themselves, they developed an elaborate system of magic. There were incantations for every purpose, spells to heal the sick, rituals to purify the polluted, ceremonies to drive away demons. The priests, particularly those of Enki, were masters of this knowledge. They knew the secret names of demons, the words of power that could bind or banish them. They performed divination, reading the future in the livers of sacrificed sheep, in the patterns of oil on water, in the movements of the stars. The Mesopotamians also told stories of great monsters that threatened cosmic order. We've already mentioned Tiamat and her 11 creatures, the army of chaos. There was also Anzu, the bird demon who stole the Tablet of Destinies. There was Humbaba, guardian of the cedar forest, whose roar was a flood, whose breath was fire, whose jaws were death. Gilgamesh and Enkidu killed him, but his death was an offence to the gods, who had placed him there as a protector. There was the Bull of Heaven, sent by Ishtar to kill Gilgamesh. It was so powerful that with each snort of its breath, it created earthquakes that killed hundreds of people. Gilgamesh and Enkidu killed it too, but again, this was an offence that required punishment. These monsters were not simply obstacles for heroes to overcome. They were part of the cosmic order, placed by the gods for a purpose. Their deaths disrupted that order, and the disruption had consequences. The Mesopotamian worldview was fundamentally one of precarious order threatened by chaos. Civilization was a thin veneer over the abyss. The gods maintained order, but it was fragile. Demons pressed in from the edges. The underworld threatened to overflow its boundaries. Chaos always waited to return. Humanity's role was to maintain the temples, to perform the rituals, to keep the gods happy and fed with offerings. If the rituals were neglected, if the gods were offended, order could collapse. The flood could come again, monsters could overrun the world, disease and misfortune could multiply beyond measure. This created a worldview that was simultaneously pessimistic and pragmatic. Life was hard and uncertain, but there were things one could do to improve one's chances. One could perform the right rituals, say the right prayers, wear the right amulets. One could be careful not to offend the gods or violate taboos. One could live correctly. And yet, ultimately, much was beyond human control. The gods were capricious. Demons were numerous. Death was inevitable. The best one could hope for was to live well, to be remembered, to have descendants who would make offerings to one's spirit after death. Let these ancient fears drift through your mind and dissolve. The demons of the night no longer hunt you. The gods no longer demand sacrifice. You are safe in the modern world, far removed from those ancient terrors. But perhaps in some deep part of the psyche, those old fears still echo. Fear of the dark, fear of the unknown, fear of death. Acknowledge them and let them go. Breathe them out. You are safe. You are protected. The night holds no demons now. Only rest. Only peace. Part 13. The Wisdom Literature. Not all Mesopotamian texts were myths and epics. There was also a substantial body of wisdom literature. Texts offering advice on how to live, on ethics, on dealing with suffering. One such text is sometimes called the Babylonian Theodicy. a dialogue between a sufferer and his friend. The sufferer complains that he has lived righteously but has received only misfortune. He has honoured the gods, performed all the proper rituals, lived according to the moral code, yet he suffers while the wicked prosper. His friend offers conventional wisdom. The gods' ways are mysterious. Surely the sufferer has committed some unknown offence. He should continue to be patient and faithful. But the sufferer is not satisfied with these answers. He pushes back, questioning divine justice. If the gods are just, why do the righteous suffer? Why do the wicked prosper? What is the point of living morally if morality brings only pain? The dialogue goes back and forth, exploring these questions without reaching a definitive answer. The friend's arguments become weaker. The sufferer's complaints become more pointed. In the end, there is no resolution, only the acknowledgement that life is often unjust, and the gods' purposes are inscrutable. This text is remarkable for its honesty. It does not offer easy answers or platitudes. It acknowledges the real problem of undeserved suffering and the inadequacy of conventional religious explanations. Another wisdom text is The Dialogue of Pessimism, a darkly comic exchange between a master and his slave. The master proposes doing various activities, going to the palace, eating dinner, hunting, having a family, and so on. Each time the slave agrees it's a good idea and explains why. But then the master immediately changes his mind and says he won't do the thing after all. And each time the slave agrees this is also wise, and explains why the activity would actually be bad. Every action has arguments for and against it. Every choice can be justified or condemned. In the end, the master asks what is good, and the slave replies, "To break my neck and your neck and throw us into the river." The master asks what the slave is talking about, and the slave counters, who is tall enough to reach heaven, who is broad enough to encompass the earth. In other words, no human wisdom is sufficient to answer life's fundamental questions. We're too small, too limited. The best we can do is acknowledge our ignorance. These texts reveal a culture capable of deep philosophical reflection, willing to question even its own religious assumptions, aware of the limitations of human knowledge and the ambiguity of existence. They remind us that the ancient Mesopotamians were not naive believers in simple myths. They were thoughtful people, grappling with the same questions that still occupy us. Why do we suffer? What is the meaning of life? How should we live? Is there justice in the universe? They reach different answers than we might, or perhaps, like us, they reached no definitive answers at all. But they ask the questions sincerely, and their attempts to answer them survive on clay tablets, voices from millennia ago still speaking to us about the human condition. Your mind is quiet now, drifting through these ancient thoughts like a boat on calm water. The questions don't need answers tonight. They can simply exist, acknowledged but not urgent. You can rest without resolving them. The ancient peoples did, going to sleep under the same stars you sleep under, wondering the same things you wonder, and finding peace nonetheless. Part 14. The Real Historical Anunnaki. We've been exploring the Anunnaki as they appear in mythology, as gods and divine beings. But we should also consider what they might have represented to the people who told these stories. The Anunnaki were not a consistent group across all texts and time periods. In the earliest Sumerian texts, they seem to be a general term for the great gods, particularly in their role as judges and decision-makers. In later periods, the term became more specifically associated with the underworld deities. The word Anunnaki appears to be a compound, Anuna and Ki. An means heaven, Ki means earth. So Anunnaki might mean something like those of heaven and earth, or princely offspring of heaven and earth. There were said to be anywhere from 7 to more than 50 Anunnaki, depending on the text. The most common number was 7, corresponding to the 7 planets known to ancient astronomy: Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. In their role as judges, the Anunnaki decreed fates. When the gods assembled to determine someone's destiny, whether a hero, a king, or humanity as a whole, it was often the Anunnaki who made the decision. In the underworld, the Anunnaki sat in judgment of the dead. They determined what kind of afterlife each person would have, though as we've discussed, the Mesopotamian afterlife was fairly uniform regardless of one's deeds in life. Scholars have long debated what the Anunnaki originally represented. Some suggest they were personifications of natural forces or celestial bodies. Others believe they represented ancestors or culture heroes who were later deified. Still others think they were always understood as gods, divine beings separate from and superior to humanity. What's clear is that the Anunnaki played a central role in Mesopotamian religious thought for thousands of years. They appear in texts from the earliest Sumerian periods, through the fall of Babylon to the Persians in 539 BCE, and then, gradually, they faded from memory. As the old religions were supplanted by new faiths, Zoroastrianism, Christianity, Islam, the Anunnaki were forgotten. The clay tablets that recorded their stories were buried under desert sand and the rubble of fallen cities. For more than 2,000 years, the Anunnaki slept in the earth, their names unspoken, their stories unread. But the tablets survived, and in the 19th century, archaeologists began excavating the ruins of ancient Mesopotamian cities. They found libraries of clay tablets, thousands upon thousands of them, covered in cuneiform writing. Slowly, painstakingly, scholars learned to read cuneiform again. They translated the texts, and the stories of the Anunnaki returned to human consciousness after a silence of millennia. The rediscovery of these texts was revolutionary. Suddenly there were creation stories older than Genesis, flood accounts older than Noah, legal codes older than Moses. The biblical narratives, long assumed to be the earliest accounts of these events, were shown to be part of a much older tradition. This caused considerable controversy in the 19th and early 20th centuries, but it also opened up an entire civilization to modern understanding. The Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians, peoples known only from biblical references or classical sources, emerged as real cultures with rich literatures, sophisticated philosophies, and complex religious systems. And at the centre of that religious system stood the Anunnaki. In recent decades, the Anunnaki have taken on new life in popular culture, though often in forms that would be unrecognisable to the ancient Mesopotamians. Various fringe theories have claimed the Anunnaki were actually ancient astronauts, that they came to Earth to mine gold, that they genetically engineered humanity as a slave species. These ideas, popularised by writers like Zecharia Sitchin, are not supported by actual scholarship. The tablets don't say these things, but the theories have captured imaginations, and for many people today, Anunnaki means aliens rather than gods. This is, in a way, a continuation of an ancient tradition, reinterpreting old gods in terms of new understanding. The Mesopotamians themselves did this, syncretizing gods from different cultures, reinterpreting myths to fit new political situations, adapting ancient stories to new contexts. So perhaps we shouldn't be surprised that modern people do the same, reading the ancient texts through the lens of science fiction rather than theology. The stories continue to evolve, as stories always do, but tonight we're interested in the original stories, the myths as the Mesopotamians told them. We want to hear what they said about the gods, the creation of the world, the meaning of human existence. We want to touch, as closely as possible, the ancient worldview that produced these extraordinary texts, and in doing so, we find that much of it still resonates. The questions the Mesopotamians asked are still our questions. The struggles they depicted, between order and chaos, life and death, justice and injustice, are still our struggles. The gods may change, the answers may change, but the questions remain. Your breathing is very slow now, very deep. You're on the edge of sleep, perhaps already dreaming. The ancient world and the modern world blur together. Time is circular, remember? The past and present touch. The stories that are older than history are still being told, still unfolding, still inviting us to wonder. Rest now. The Anunnaki have been speaking to us across 5,000 years. Their words echo in the quiet night. Listen to them fade into silence. Let them carry you into sleep. Part 15. The Magic and Rituals. The Mesopotamians did not separate the sacred and the mundane the way modern cultures do. Every aspect of life was intertwined with religion, and magic was simply the technology of interacting with the divine and supernatural forces that permeated reality. To fall ill was not simply a biological event, but a spiritual attack. A demon had entered the body, or a god was punishing a transgression, or someone had performed witchcraft. The cure involved not just herbs and bandages, but incantations and rituals. The priests maintained vast collections of magical texts. There were incantations for healing, for protection, for success in business, for love, for curses, for blessings. These texts were precise, requiring specific words spoken in specific ways at specific times. One common form of magic involves sympathetic substitution. To cure a sick person, A priest might make a clay figurine representing the patient. The disease would be transferred to the figurine through ritual, and then the figurine would be destroyed, carrying the disease away. Another technique involved ritual purification. Water was holy, particularly water from sacred rivers. Washing with such water, accompanied by the proper incantations, could remove pollution, cure disease, or prepare someone for divine presence. Dream interpretation was crucial. Dreams were messages from gods or invasions by spirits. A skilled priest could interpret dreams and provide remedies for troubling ones. There were texts cataloguing thousands of dreams and their meanings. Divination was essential for important decisions. Before a king went to war, before a marriage was arranged, before a business transaction, someone consulted the omens. This might involve extispicy, examining the liver of a sacrificed sheep. The patterns of lobes, marks, and colours on the liver revealed the will of the gods. Or one might consult an astrologer who read the movements of planets and stars. The Mesopotamians were skilled astronomers, tracking celestial movements with remarkable precision. They believed the heavens reflected earthly events, that the gods wrote their intentions in the stars. Oil divination was another method. Oil dropped into water would form patterns that could be interpreted. Smoke rising from incense could be read. Even the flight patterns of birds revealed divine messages. Nothing happened by chance. Everything was a sign, if one knew how to read it. This worldview can seem alien to modern minds, but it reflects a deep belief that reality is interconnected, that the spiritual and material are not separate but interpenetrating. What happens in the divine realm affects the human realm and vice versa. The Mesopotamians also practiced protective magic. Amulets were common, inscribed with names of protective gods or images of protective demons. These would be worn on the body or hung in doorways. Magic circles were drawn around houses or sick people to keep demons out. Holy water was sprinkled. Incantations were repeated. There were also curses. If someone had wronged you, you could hire a priest to curse them. These curses were serious business, invoking gods to bring misfortune, disease, or death to your enemy. But cursing was dangerous. If done improperly, the curse might rebound on the one who cast it, and the gods frowned on unjust curses spoken against the innocent. The magical texts often include long lists of possible offences that might have caused a person's current suffering. Did you swear falsely? Did you move a boundary stone? Did you dishonour your parents? Did you eat sacred food? Did you have sex during a forbidden time? Did you practice witchcraft? The lists go on and on, cataloguing every possible transgression. Often the sufferer wouldn't know which offence they'd committed, so the ritual would cover all possibilities. Whatever my sin, whatever my iniquity, whatever my transgression, whether I know it or whether I know it not, release me. Let your heart be at rest toward me. There's something touching about these prayers, these desperate attempts to appease unknown divine anger, to find relief from suffering whose cause cannot be understood. The Mesopotamians lived in an uncertain world. They sought to control what they could through magic and ritual, and they accepted what they could not control as the will of the gods. It was a practical approach to the mystery of existence. Let these ancient rituals drift through your mind like incense smoke. The words of power, spoken thousands of years ago, still echo faintly. They meant something to the people who spoke them. They provided comfort, hope, a sense of agency in an uncertain world. You don't need such magic now, but perhaps you can appreciate what it represented. The human desire to understand, to control, to find meaning in suffering and order in chaos. Those desires haven't changed. Only the methods. Rest now in the certainty that you are safe, that whatever powers govern the universe, whether gods or natural laws or random chance, you have done your best today. That is enough. Let go of what you cannot control. Breathe deeply. Sleep comes soon. Part 16. The end of the gods. The Mesopotamian civilization lasted for more than 3,000 years, from the first Sumerian cities around 4500 BCE to the fall of Babylon in 539 BCE. Throughout that long history, the gods remained central to life. But civilizations fall, empires crumble, and eventually even gods die, or at least people stop believing in them. The end came gradually. First, the Persians conquered Babylon, bringing with them Zoroastrianism, a new religion that would deeply influence later faiths. Then Alexander the Great brought Greek culture. Later came the Romans, then Christianity, then Islam. With each new power, the old gods receded further. Their temples fell into ruin, their rituals were abandoned, the priests who knew the secret prayers died without passing on their knowledge. The Mesopotamian languages ceased to be spoken. Sumerian died out as a living language around 2000 BCE, though it continued as a literary and liturgical language for centuries. Akkadian lasted longer but eventually gave way to Aramaic, which in turn gave way to Arabic. The cuneiform writing system, which had recorded the deeds of gods and kings for 3 millennia, fell out of use. The last known cuneiform inscription dates to 75 CE. After that, silence. The temples were abandoned, buried by sand and time. The great ziggurats crumbled. The cities were forgotten, becoming tells, artificial hills marking where cities once stood. For nearly 2,000 years the Anunnaki were completely forgotten. No one read their stories, no one spoke their names. They existed only as clay tablets buried in the ruins, waiting. And yet, in a sense, they never truly died. The stories they told, the myths they embodied, influenced the cultures that came after. The biblical creation account bears clear influence from Mesopotamian sources. The flood story is particularly obvious. Noah's Ark is clearly related to Utnapishtim's boat. The concept of a divine assembly, of gods meeting to make decisions, appears in the Hebrew Bible in vestigial form. The idea of sacred laws given by gods, of kingship as a divine gift, of temples as divine dwelling places, all of these continue in later religions. Even specific deities transformed and survived. Ishtar became Astarte, became Aphrodite, became Venus. Her worship continued in new forms. The symbols changed, but the goddess of love and war endured. The story of descent to the underworld and return, which we see in Inanna's descent, echoes through later myths. Persephone descending to Hades, Orpheus seeking Eurydice, Christ's descent to hell before resurrection. The pattern persists, so perhaps the gods didn't die so much as transform, adapting to new cultures, new languages, new religious systems. The specific names were forgotten, but the essential stories, the archetypal patterns survived. And now, thanks to archaeology and scholarship, we can read the original texts again. We can know the Anunnaki as the Mesopotamians knew them. We can hear their stories in something close to the original form. This is a kind of resurrection. The gods have returned, not as objects of worship, but as objects of study, of fascination, of imaginative engagement. They live again in the minds of those who read about them, who wonder about them, who fall asleep listening to their stories. In that sense, the gods are immortal after all. Not because they never die, but because they can always be reborn. As long as someone tells their stories, they exist. And tonight, we are telling their stories. We are bringing them back, if only for a little while, letting them walk again through human consciousness. The Anunnaki are here, in this moment, as you drift towards sleep, as these words create images in your mind. They are patterns of meaning, templates of story, archetypes of the human psyche. They are the dreams we've been dreaming for 5,000 years, and they will continue to be dreamed long after we too are dust. Your eyes are so heavy now, your body is completely relaxed. The ancient gods watch over you as you fall asleep, not as beings with power over you, but as the oldest of friends, the first stories humanity told itself when we learned to write, to think, to wonder about the nature of existence. They have watched over countless sleepers before you. They will watch over countless sleepers after. You are part of that long chain, that eternal procession of humanity seeking rest at the end of the day. Sleep now. The Anunnaki bid you good night. Their stories will continue in your dreams. Part 17. The Legacy in Stone. Throughout Mesopotamia, the kings left monuments. Not just clay tablets with writing, but massive stone sculptures, reliefs carved into cliffsides, statues of gods and rulers. These too tell the story of the Anunnaki, though in a different way. The Stele of Hammurabi, for instance, one of the most famous artifacts from ancient Mesopotamia, shows King Hammurabi receiving the laws from Shamash, the sun god and god of justice. Hammurabi stands in respectful posture while Shamash, seated on his throne, extends the rod and ring, symbols of justice and authority. The message is clear. The king's authority comes from the gods. The The laws he enforces are divine laws. To break them is not just a crime against society, but a sin against heaven. This was typical of Mesopotamian kingship ideology. The king was chosen by the gods, particularly by Enlil or Marduk. He ruled as their representative on earth. His duty was to maintain justice, to protect the weak, to ensure the proper worship of the gods. In return, the gods granted him victory in battle, prosperity for his kingdom, long life and glory. The relationship was reciprocal. The king served the gods, and the gods supported the king. This ideology is visible in countless royal inscriptions. Kings would describe how the gods called them to rule, how the gods fought alongside them in battle, how the gods blessed their reigns. They would list their accomplishments, temples built, canals dug, walls raised, enemies defeated, all with divine assistance. The great palace reliefs of the Assyrian Empire show this vividly. In scene after scene, kings hunt lions, storm cities, receive tribute from defeated enemies. But above these scenes, or in the corners, divine symbols hover: the winged disk of Asher, the stars of Ishtar, the crescent of Sin. The gods are always present, always watching, always involved in human affairs. One particularly striking relief shows the Assyrian king Ashurnasirpal II standing before the sacred tree, with winged protective spirits flanking him. These spirits, called Apkalu, were wise beings who served as intermediaries between gods and humans. They had the bodies of men but the wings of birds, and they carried sacred objects for ritual purification. The sacred tree itself is a common motif in Mesopotamian art. It represents the cosmic axis, the centre of the world, the connection between earth and heaven. Kings would ceremonially tend to sacred trees, symbolising their role in maintaining cosmic order. The Ishtar Gate of Babylon, reconstructed in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin, is another stunning example. The entire gate is covered in glazed blue bricks, decorated with images of bulls, representing Adad, the storm god, and dragons, representing Marduk. These creatures march in endless procession along the gate and the processional way that led to it. During the New Year festival, the statue of Marduk would be carried along this path in a great ceremony, affirming his kingship over the gods and the city's preeminence in the world. Standing before the Ishtar Gate even today, even as a reconstruction in a museum far from Babylon, one can feel something of its power. The blue is so vivid, so intense. The creatures are stylized but still majestic, still fierce. This was a gateway between worlds, between the mundane city and the sacred precinct. The ziggurats, too, still stand in places, or at least their lower levels do. The ziggurat of Ur, rebuilt in the 20th century based on ancient plans, gives a sense of how these structures dominated the landscape. Rising in 3 massive tiers, crowned with a temple at its peak, it must have been visible for miles across the flat Mesopotamian plain. Imagine being a traveller approaching Ur for the first time. You've been walking through featureless desert for days. Then, on the horizon, the ziggurat appears, growing larger as you approach. It is brown like the desert, but shaped by human hands, impossibly large, a mountain where no mountain should be. As you enter the city, the ziggurat looms over everything, a constant reminder of the god's presence, of the cosmic order, of humanity's place in the great hierarchy of being. At night, fires would burn at its peak, visible for miles, a beacon declaring that here the gods dwell, here civilization has established itself against the chaos of the wilderness. These monuments were meant to last forever. The kings who built them explicitly stated this. "May this stand for all time," they wrote. "May future generations see it and know my name." And many of them have lasted, if not forever, then for thousands of years. Long after the kings who built them died, long after their dynasties ended, long after their languages ceased to be spoken, the stones remained. They remained still, weathered and broken but present, testimony to the civilization that created them, to the gods who inspired them, to the human drive to build something that will outlast our brief lives. Let the image of these ancient monuments rest in your mind. Stone enduring through millennia, brick worn by wind and sand but still standing, the sacred trees carved in relief, still visible after all this time. There is something comforting about this permanence. So much is temporary, fleeting, forgotten. But some things last. Some creations outlive their creators by centuries, by millennia. Your own works may not last so long, but perhaps they will last longer than you think. Perhaps something you create, some words you write, some kindness you show, will ripple forward through time in ways you cannot predict. Rest in that thought. You are part of the long story of humanity, building, creating, loving, striving. The Mesopotamians did it. Their works still stand, and you are doing it now, in your own way. The night is deep. Your breathing is slow. The ancient stones stand silent in the desert, and you are safe in your bed, wrapped in the comfort of the present moment, drifting gently towards sleep. Part 18. The Celestial Order. The Mesopotamians were expert astronomers. They tracked the movements of celestial bodies with remarkable precision, recording their observations on clay tablets that survive to this day. The heavens were not just beautiful or interesting to them, they were meaningful. The gods lived there. Their will could be read in the stars. The path of the sun through the sky marked out the year. The Mesopotamians recognized 12 divisions along this path, the 12 signs of the zodiac. These were not the same as our modern zodiac signs, though there are similarities. They represented sections of the sky through which the sun, moon, and planets moved. Each planet was identified with a god. The sun was Shamash, who rode across the sky each day in his chariot, seeing all that happened on earth, judging between right and wrong. The moon was Sin, whose waxing and waning mark the passage of months. Venus, the brightest planet, was Inanna, Ishtar, goddess of love and war, appearing as both morning and evening star. Mars was Nergal, god of war and plague. Jupiter was Marduk, king of the gods. Saturn was Ninurta, the warrior god. Mercury was Nabu, god of wisdom and writing. These identifications were not arbitrary. They were based on the characteristics of each planet. Mars is red, the colour of blood, so it is associated with war. Venus is brilliant and beautiful, so it is associated with the goddess of love. Jupiter is the largest and brightest planet, apart from Venus, so it is the king of gods. The Mesopotamian astronomers tracked the planets' movements carefully. They could predict eclipses, conjunctions, and other celestial events. They maintained observation records that stretched across centuries, allowing them to identify patterns and cycles. All of this was for divination. The position and movement of celestial bodies revealed the intentions of the gods. An eclipse, a conjunction of planets, the appearance of a comet, all of these were messages to be interpreted. If Mars and Venus appeared close together in the sky, it might portend war. If the moon was eclipsed, it could signal danger to the king. If Jupiter rose at an auspicious time, it might promise prosperity. The Mesopotamian kings employed teams of astronomers whose job was to watch the sky and report omens. These reports survive in royal correspondence. On the 14th day, the moon and sun were seen together. This is favourable for the king. The king's enemies will be defeated. The astronomers took their responsibilities seriously. They understood that mistakes in observation or interpretation could lead to disastrous decisions. They cross-checked their observations with colleagues, consulted ancient texts recording past omens and their outcomes, and presented their findings with appropriate caution. Over time, they accumulated vast amounts of astronomical data. They recognized that celestial events occurred in cycles. The Saros cycle of eclipses, for instance, which repeats every 18 years and 11 days. They could predict when these events would occur and prepare interpretations in advance. This knowledge was sacred and secret. The astronomical texts were kept in temple libraries, accessible only to trained priests. Revealing such knowledge to the uninitiated was forbidden. The heavens were the private language of the gods, and only those properly trained could read it. The Mesopotamians also identified constellations, grouping stars into recognizable patterns. Some of these are ancestors of our own constellations. The bull of heaven became Taurus, the lion became Leo. Others are lost to us, or their identifications remain uncertain. They told stories about these constellations, myths explaining their presence in the sky. Often these were connected to earthly myths. The bull of heaven that appears in the Epic of Gilgamesh was also seen in the stars. When Gilgamesh and Enkidu killed it, they threw its hindquarters into the sky, where they became a constellation. The stars themselves were sometimes seen as writing. The gods had written their intentions across the heavens in a script that those with knowledge could read. The night sky was a tablet, constantly being rewritten as the celestial bodies moved. Imagine stepping outside on a clear Mesopotamian night. The air is cool after the heat of the day. Above you, the sky is vast and filled with stars. The Milky Way stretches, from horizon to horizon, so bright you can see by its light. You know the names of the stars, the stories of the constellations. You know which star is Shamash's herald, announcing the sun's approach. You know where to look for Ishtar, the evening star, and you whisper a prayer to her as she appears. You understand that what happens up there is connected to what happens down here. The gods are moving through the heavens, and their movements determine the fate of kingdoms, of harvests, of your own life. It is both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because there is order, pattern, meaning. The universe is not random. Terrifying because that order is beyond your control. The gods will do what they will do. You can only watch, interpret, and prepare. The Mesopotamian view of the cosmos was hierarchical. The heavens were the highest realm, home of the great gods. Below was the earth, the middle realm, home of humanity. Below that was the Apsu, the cosmic freshwater ocean, home of Enki and the ancient wisdom. And deepest of all was the underworld, realm of the dead. These realms were connected. Water from the Apsu fed the rivers and springs of earth. The gods descended from heaven to walk among humans. The dead descended to the underworld. And at night, even the sun descended, travelling through the underworld to emerge again in the east at dawn. Everything was interconnected, part of one great cosmic system. Nothing existed in isolation. The health of the king affected the fertility of the land. The proper performance of rituals maintained cosmic order. The movement of planets signalled divine intentions. To live in this world view was to live in a meaningful universe, where everything mattered, where nothing was accidental, where humanity had a role to play in maintaining the cosmic order. Modern cosmology tells us something very different. We live in a vast, perhaps infinite universe, governed by natural laws, indifferent to human concerns. The stars are not gods, but massive spheres of fusing hydrogen, impossibly distant. The planets are barren rocks and gas giants, following gravitational mechanics, signifying nothing. Which view is more comforting? The ancient one, where the universe is full of meaning but you are at the mercy of capricious gods? Or the modern one, where you have more control but the universe doesn't care whether you exist? Perhaps there is comfort in both. The ancient view reminds us that humans have always sought meaning, always tried to read the universe, always believed we are part of something larger. The modern view gives us the dignity of understanding, the power of knowledge, the freedom from divine tyranny. Tonight, under the same stars the Mesopotamians watched 5,000 years ago, you can choose which meaning to find. Or you can simply rest, letting the ancient stories and modern knowledge both be true in their own ways, both offering their particular gifts. The stars wheel overhead in their eternal dance. Gravity, divine will, natural law, and sacred order. Perhaps these are just different languages for describing the same mystery. Your breathing is deep and even. The cosmos, ancient or modern, vast or intimate, holds you gently. You are stardust, as modern science tells us. You are clay animated by divine breath, as ancient myth tells us. Both are true. Both are beautiful. Sleep now under the watching stars. The Anunnaki have become constellations, and they watch over you still, transformed but present, ancient but eternal. Part 19. The Sacred Prostitutes and Temple Life. The Mesopotamian temples were not just places of worship, but centres of economic, social and cultural life. They owned vast amounts of land, employed hundreds or thousands of people, and conducted business on a massive scale. They were banks, workshops, schools, and courts, as well as houses of the gods. Within the temples served many different classes of priests and priestesses, each with specific roles and responsibilities. There were high priests who conducted the most sacred rituals, incantation priests who performed exorcisms and healing ceremonies, divination priests who interpreted omens, and many others. Among the most fascinating and misunderstood were the sacred prostitutes, known as Ishtartu or Kadishtu. These were women, and sometimes men, dedicated to the service of Ishtar Inanna, goddess of love and sexuality. They practiced ritual sex as a form of worship, though the exact nature and extent of this practice is debated by scholars. The Epic of Gilgamesh mentions a temple prostitute named Shamat, who plays a crucial role in civilizing Enkidu. She spends 6 days and 7 nights with him, teaching him the ways of humanity. Through their intimacy, Enkidu loses his connection to the animal world, but gains language, culture, and humanity. This story reveals how the Mesopotamians understood sexuality, not as something shameful or merely physical, but as a civilizing force, a way of connecting the animal and divine aspects of human nature. Sex was sacred, a gift from the goddess, a way of participating in the creative power of the universe. The temple prostitutes were not degraded or exploited, at least not in the ideal conception, though reality may have been more complex. They were honoured servants of the goddess, performing a sacred function. They received payment for their services, but this was understood as an offering to the goddess, not mere commerce. Herodotus, the Greek historian, wrote about Babylonian temple prostitution, though his account is sensationalized and probably inaccurate in many details. He claimed that every Babylonian woman had to serve once in the Temple of Ishtar, offering herself to a stranger before she could marry. Modern scholars are skeptical of this claim. Herodotus was writing centuries after the practice had evolved, if it ever existed in the form he describes, and he was an outsider looking in, prone to misunderstanding and exaggeration. What seems more likely is that sacred prostitution was a specialized profession, not a universal requirement. Women dedicated to the goddess would serve in this capacity, while others participated in temple life in different ways. The temples also housed other specialized servants. There were singers and musicians who performed during rituals. There were craftsmen who created cult statues and sacred objects. There were scribes who maintained records and copied sacred texts. Daily life in the temple followed a strict schedule of rituals. Each morning, the cult statue of the god would be awakened, washed, dressed in fresh clothes, and offered a meal. Throughout the day, prayers would be sung, incense burned, offerings presented. In the evening, the god would be prepared for sleep. This was not symbolic to the Mesopotamians. They believed the god actually dwelt in the statue, that the statue needed food, clothing, rest. The statue was the god's body on earth, and it had to be cared for properly. On festival days, the rituals became more elaborate. The statue might be carried in procession through the city. There would be music, dancing, feasting. The entire community would participate in honouring the god. The most important festival was the New Year celebration, Akitu, held in spring. This festival lasted 11 days and included elaborate rituals reenacting the creation myth. The king would participate, his role involving ritual humiliation and renewal. He would be stripped of his regalia, struck in the face by the high priest, and forced to declare that he had not sinned against the god. If the king wept, it was considered a good omen. The god was pleased. The king would then be restored to his position, given back his crown and scepter, symbolizing the renewal of his divine mandate. During the Akitu festival, the destinies for the coming year would be determined. The gods would assemble, represented by their cult statues being brought together, and decree what would happen in the year ahead. This was when the Tablet of Destinies was consulted, when the fates of the kingdom were written. All of this temple activity was supported by vast economic resources. The temples owned fields that were worked by farmers, who gave a portion of their harvest to the temple. They owned workshops where textiles, pottery, and metal goods were produced. They engaged in trade, lending money at interest, conducting business transactions. The temples kept meticulous records of all this activity on clay tablets. Thousands of these administrative texts survive, giving us detailed knowledge of temple economics. We can see what the temple owned, what it produced, what it traded, how much workers were paid. These texts are less exciting than myths and epics, but they reveal something important. The Mesopotamian religion was not just about belief, but about practice, about the material maintenance of the divine presence on earth. The gods had to be fed, clothed, housed. Their temples had to be maintained. This required tremendous resources and organization. In a sense, the entire civilization was organized around this task. The surplus production of agriculture supported the temples. The temples employed craftsmen and scribes. The scribes maintained records and copied texts, preserving knowledge. The king protected the temples and was legitimized by them. The gods blessed the king and the land. It was a complex, interdependent system, and it worked for thousands of years. Picture yourself in the temple courtyard in the cool of the evening. The day's main rituals are complete. Musicians are still playing softly in the background. The smell of incense drifts from the inner sanctuary. Temple workers move about their tasks, sweeping, organising, preparing for the next day. You feel the weight of tradition here, the sense that these same rituals have been performed in this same way for hundreds of years. Your father brought you here as a child. Your grandfather was brought here by his father. The chain stretches back beyond memory, back to the founding of the city, back to when the gods first established order in the world. There is comfort in this continuity, this connection to the past and future. You are part of something larger than yourself, larger than your brief life. The gods are eternal, and their worship will continue long after you're gone. But you don't think about that now. Now you simply breathe the incense-scented air, listen to the music, feel the cool evening breeze, and know that you are in a sacred place, doing sacred work, connected to the divine. Rest in that feeling of connection. You too are part of something larger. The ancient worshippers felt it in their temples. You can feel it in your own way, in your own time. The forms change, but the human need for meaning, for connection, for transcendence remains constant. Let your body relax completely. Let your mind drift. The temple courtyard fades into darkness. The music fades to silence. Only peace remains. Only rest. Only the gentle approach of sleep. Part 20. The Fall of Babylon. All things end. All civilizations fall. And the Mesopotamian civilization, despite its 3,000-year run, despite its mighty cities and powerful gods, eventually came to an end. The final act took place in Babylon in 539 BCE. Babylon was then ruled by Nabonidus, a strange king who had alienated the priesthood of Marduk by favouring the moon god Sin. He had spent years away from Babylon, dwelling in the Arabian desert, leaving his son Belshazzar to rule in his absence. The priests of Marduk were furious. The king was supposed to participate in the New Year festival, to take Marduk's hand to renew his mandate to rule. But Nabonidus was absent, and the festival could not be properly performed. The cosmic order was breaking down. Meanwhile, to the east, a new power was rising. Cyrus the Great of Persia had been conquering his neighbours, building an empire that stretched from the Mediterranean to Central Asia. Now he turned his attention to Babylon. Nabonidus finally returned to Babylon, but it was too late. The priests and people were ready to welcome anyone who would restore the proper worship of Marduk, and Cyrus was clever enough to position himself as exactly that person. When the Persian army approached Babylon, the city surrendered without a fight. Cyrus entered as a liberator, not a conqueror. He immediately went to the temple of Marduk and performed the proper rituals, taking the god's hand, declaring himself chosen by Marduk to rule. The priest was satisfied, the people were relieved, and Babylon passed from Babylonian to Persian control with barely a drop of bloodshed. Cyrus was magnanimous in victory. He released captive peoples, allowed religious freedom, presented himself as the restorer of traditional worship. His famous Cyrus cylinder, a clay inscription, proclaims his devotion to Marduk and his restoration of the god's temples. But the truth was that Babylon's independence was gone. It was now a province of the Persian Empire, one city among many, no longer the centre of the world. The Persians brought their own religion, Zoroastrianism, which taught that there was one supreme god, Ahura Mazda, locked in an eternal struggle with the evil spirit Angra-Mainyu. This was a different worldview from the traditional Mesopotamian one, with its pantheon of gods, its complex mythologies, its acceptance of moral ambiguity. Yet for a while, the old religion persisted. The temples continued to function. Cuneiform continued to be written. The traditional priests maintained their rituals, but gradually, over the next few centuries, it all faded away. Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire in 331 BCE, and Babylon fell under Greek rule. Alexander even died in Babylon in 323 BCE, perhaps planning to make it his capital, but his empire fragmented after his death, and Babylon was fought over by his successors. The city declined. A new capital, Seleucia, was built nearby, and people migrated there. The great temples fell into disrepair. The rituals were performed less frequently, then not at all. The priests died, and fewer young people trained to replace them. The cuneiform script was gradually replaced by Aramaic written in alphabetic script. The old myths were no longer copied. The language of Akkadian ceased to be spoken, then ceased to be written, then was forgotten entirely. By the 1st century CE, Babylon was largely abandoned, a place of ruins. Travellers passing by marvelled that such a great city could fall so completely, but they could no longer read the inscriptions on its walls. The names of its gods meant nothing to them. The gods of Mesopotamia had fallen silent. Their temples were empty. Their stories were unread. For nearly 2,000 years they would remain in this state, buried and forgotten. It's a melancholy tale, this ending of a civilization, but perhaps it's not really an ending. The stories survived in the clay tablets, waiting to be rediscovered. The influence of Mesopotamian culture lived on in the civilizations that came after: Persian, Greek, Jewish, Christian, Islamic. The idea of written law codes, which Hammurabi had inscribed on stone, became a fundamental concept in Western civilization. The astronomical knowledge the Mesopotamians accumulated became the foundation for later astronomy and astrology. Their mathematical system, based on the number 60, still marks our division of hours into minutes and seconds, of circles into 360 degrees, and the myths themselves, once rediscovered, once again captured human imagination. The Epic of Gilgamesh is now taught in schools, performed on stages, referenced in literature. The gods have new worshippers, not literal believers perhaps, but readers, scholars, artists, who find meaning and beauty in the ancient stories. So perhaps civilizations don't truly die. They transform, they influence what comes after. They leave seeds that sprout in new soil, growing into new forms but carrying the old DNA. The Anunnaki are gone, but they are also here, now, in this moment, as we tell their stories. As long as someone speaks their names, they exist. As long as someone wonders about them, they live. Your breathing is slow and deep. The rise and fall of civilizations, the birth and death of gods, the endless cycle of creation and destruction, it all continues, wave after wave, and you are floating on those waves, carried gently towards sleep. Nothing lasts forever, but nothing is truly lost. The ancient past lives in the present, the stories continue, and you are part of that continuity, that eternal human story. Rest now. Let the weight of history settle over you like a blanket, comforting rather than crushing. You're descended from those who built cities, who wrote the first stories, who wondered about the gods. Their blood runs in your veins, metaphorically if not literally. Their dreams echo in your dreams. The night deepens, the ancient world fades, and sleep approaches on silent feet, like a god descending from heaven to earth, bringing the gift of rest to weary mortals. Welcome it. Surrender to it. The Anunnaki have finished speaking for tonight. Their archives close, their stories rest, and so should you. Part 21. The Rediscovery. In the 19th century, European archaeologists began excavating the ruins of ancient Mesopotamia. They were driven partly by colonial ambitions, partly by biblical interest, wanting to find evidence for biblical stories, and partly by pure curiosity about the ancient world. What they found astonished them. In 1843, Paul-Émile Botta began excavating at Khorsabad in what is now Iraq. He uncovered the palace of Sargon II, an Assyrian king. The walls were covered with massive stone reliefs showing the king's victories, his hunts, his divine mandate. It was unlike anything seen before. 2 years later, Austin Henry Layard began work at Nimrud and Nineveh. At Nineveh, he discovered the library of Ashurbanipal, containing thousands of clay tablets. This was one of the most significant archaeological discoveries ever made, an entire ancient library preserved for millennia. The tablets were covered in cuneiform writing, but at that time, no one could read it. It was a lost script, used by dead languages, recording the thoughts of vanished peoples. The race was on to decipher cuneiform. Scholars across Europe worked on the problem. The breakthrough came through the Behistun inscription in Iran, a massive inscription carved into a cliff face by the Persian king Darius I. It was written in 3 languages, Old Persian, Elamite, and Akkadian, all in cuneiform. Scholars could use their knowledge of Old Persian to work out the other languages. Gradually, painstakingly, the script yielded its secrets. By the 1850s, cuneiform could be read, and the tablets could be translated, and what tablets they were. There were administrative records, royal inscriptions, legal contracts, medical texts, astronomical observations, mathematical problems, and, most exciting to the public, myths and epics. In 1872, George Smith, a young scholar working at the British Museum, was translating tablets from Ashurbanipal's library. He came across a text that described a great flood, a man building a boat, animals being saved. It was clearly related to the biblical story of Noah, but it was older from a non-biblical source. Smith was so excited that, as legend has it, he began taking off his clothes and running around the room. He had discovered the Mesopotamian flood story, part of what would become known as the Epic of Gilgamesh. The discovery caused a sensation. Here was proof that the biblical flood story was based on older traditions. It raised questions about the uniqueness and inspiration of the Bible. It opened up an entire new world of ancient literature. Over the following decades, more tablets were discovered and translated. The creation epic Enuma Elish emerged, the descent of Ishtar to the underworld, the myths of Adapa, of Etana, of countless others. An entire mythology, forgotten for 2 millennia, returned to human knowledge. Scholars realized they were looking at the earliest known civilization, at the origin of writing itself, at the foundation of much that would come after in Western culture. Mesopotamia was not just a biblical footnote, but a civilization in its own right, sophisticated and complex, worthy of study for its own sake. The Sumerians, previously known only from a few biblical references, emerged as the earliest urban civilization. Their language was unlike any other known language. Their texts revealed a worldview both familiar and alien. Archaeological work continued throughout the 20th century and continues today. Each new excavation brings new discoveries. In 2003, archaeologists discovered what may be the Library of Sippar, another massive collection of tablets. In 2015, ISIS destroyed ancient sites in Iraq and Syria, a tragic loss of irreplaceable heritage, but scholars continue to work with the tablets that had been removed to museums decades earlier. Digital technology now allows tablets to be photographed in high resolution, their texts transcribed and translated, their contents made available online. There are digital databases of cuneiform texts that scholars worldwide can access. The ancient library has become a virtual library, accessible to anyone with an internet connection. This means that the stories of the Anunnaki are more available now than they have been in 2,000 years. Anyone can read the Epic of Gilgamesh. Anyone can read the Enuma Elish. The myths are no longer locked in clay tablets in museum basements, but are freely available, translated into dozens of languages. In a sense, the gods have been fully resurrected. They exist not just as academic subjects, but as living cultural presences. Artists create works inspired by them. Writers retell their stories. Filmmakers and game designers incorporate them into their creations. The Anunnaki have entered the modern imagination. They mean different things to different people. Ancient myths, historical curiosities, evidence of ancient wisdom, or even, for some, proof of ancient alien contact. But regardless of how they're interpreted, they are present. They are known. This rediscovery is itself a kind of miracle. These stories were written on clay, one of the most fragile materials imaginable. Yet because clay, once baked, is essentially stone, the tablets survived. Water couldn't dissolve them. Fire couldn't burn them. They sat in the ruins for millennia, waiting. And when they were finally found and read, they spoke. Across an immense gulf of time, across the deaths of languages and civilizations and entire worldviews, the ancient voices spoke again. I will proclaim to the world the deeds of Gilgamesh. And we hear. Across 5,000 years we hear. The stories endure. The gods live in the telling. And every time someone reads these ancient texts, every time someone listens to their stories, the Anunnaki walk the earth again. Tonight they walk through your mind as you drift towards sleep. Ancient voices speaking ancient words, telling stories that are older than history, that come from the very dawn of human civilization. You are hearing what the first city dwellers heard, what the first writers wrote, what has echoed through time from the beginning of recorded human culture to this moment. Here, now. There is something profound about that connection. You are part of the great human story, the unbroken chain of people telling stories, wondering about the universe, seeking meaning in the mystery of existence. Rest in that connection. Let it support you as you fall asleep. You are not alone. You never were. The human family stretches behind you for thousands of generations, and they all wondered, all dreamed, all told stories to help themselves sleep. The Anunnaki were their dream, and now they are part of your dreams too. The circle is complete, the past and present touch. Time is circular, the stories continue. Sleep now, dear listener, the archives are closing. The ancient tablets rest in their cases. The gods return to their temples of air and imagination. The night is deep and kind. Tomorrow the sun will rise, as it has risen every day since the creation of the world. But tonight belongs to rest, to dreams, to the gentle darkness that restores and renews. The Anunnaki bid you good night. The stories older than history have been told, and now, finally, blessedly, you can sleep. Sleep well, sleepless survivor. You have journeyed with us through the ancient world, and you have arrived at rest. The destination was always here, waiting patiently, welcoming you home. Good night. This has been Sleepless Survivors. May your dreams be filled with ancient wonders, and may you wake refreshed to face a new day. Until next time, rest well.